Warning: this story destroyed a marriage, friendships, and lives. If you're not ready for the truth, don't keep watching. Let's begin. Throwaway, because obviously. So yeah, I, 32F, cheated on my husband, 34M. Before you jump down my throat, let me give context. Because context matters, even if Reddit likes to pretend it doesn't. We've been married 7 years. No kids, thank God. Decent jobs. A house we overpaid for in 2021 like idiots. On paper, we were solid. In reality, he'd been unbearable for months, nitpicky, quiet in that passive-aggressive way where you know you're being judged but can't prove it. He started doing this thing where he'd sigh loudly while loading the dishwasher, like I was personally attacking him by existing near plates. The first real sign of trouble, his trouble, not mine, was when he suddenly got into communication podcasts. Married men don't just wake up one day wanting to name their feelings. That was red flag number 1. Red flag number 2 was him asking where I was going after work. Not accusing, just asking. Calmly. Which is worse. I'll admit, around the same time I stopped coming straight home. I told him I was staying late, or meeting coworkers, or sitting in my car scrolling because I needed space. All technically true, depending on how flexible your definition of truth is. Anyway, that's the setup. Things weren't great. He was annoying. I was bored. And before anyone asks, no, I didn't plan to cheat. It just happened. Like most bad decisions. Quietly at first, and then very loudly later. That's where I'll stop for now because this already sounds worse than I intended. Here's where everyone will probably decide I'm the villain. Which, fine, but again, context. The guy I cheated with wasn't some random bar hookup. That would have at least been clean. He was my husband's cousin's friend. Which sounds worse when you say it fast. But I barely knew the cousin, and the friend was basically a stranger. Until he wasn't. He started showing up to our weekly trivia night after my husband invited him once, and then immediately forgot he existed like men do. Let's call him Ryan because that was his name, and I'm tired of pretending. Ryan listened, like aggressively. He laughed at things that weren't jokes. He noticed when I changed my hair. He told me my husband talked about me like he was lucky, which, first of all, felt fake, and second of all, worked. I know how this sounds. I know. But when you're already annoyed, flattery feels like oxygen. I didn't tell my husband about the long conversations because they were boring. That's the lie I told myself. The real reason is I liked having something that was just mine. The first unexpected thing? I actually tried to shut it down. One night I told Ryan we should cool it, and he immediately backed off, apologized, and stopped texting. That should have been the end. Instead, I panicked. The silence made me feel weirdly rejected, so I texted him first a week later. I framed it as a joke. I always frame things as jokes. Nothing physical happened yet. That's important. Or at least it was important at the time. My husband noticed something before anything even happened. He asked why I was suddenly guarding my phone like it contained nuclear codes. I laughed. Too hard. He didn't laugh back. That was the first moment I thought, oh, this might actually blow up. The actual cheating didn't start with sex. I know that sounds like a technicality, and it is, but that's how my brain organized it at the time. If nothing physical happens, you can still tell yourself you're a good person who's just confused. So I leaned into that lie hard. Ryan and I started doing lunch. Innocent lunches. Public places. I even told my husband once, casually, like I deserved a medal for honesty. I said it was a group thing, which was true the first time, and aggressively untrue every time after. I got really good at lying in layers. Truth on the outside, rot underneath. Unexpected event number 2. My husband showed up to one of those lunches, not to spy. He worked nearby and thought it'd be funny to surprise me. The timing was horrific. Ryan had just said something like, "If things were different," which is cheater code for "I'm about to ruin your life." I introduced them like everything was normal. I was smiling so hard my face hurt. My husband was polite, but quiet. He always gets quiet when he's filing something away for later. I hated that about him, which in hindsight was very convenient for me. That night he asked if I was happy, not accusing, just tired. I told him yes without hesitation. That was lie number "I don't know anymore." Then I got irritated that he'd even ask, flipped it on him, said he was projecting, and went to bed early like I was the injured party. 2 days later, Ryan kissed me in his car. I didn't stop him. I didn't exactly lean away either. I went home, brushed my teeth twice, and slept like garbage. I remember thinking, okay, now it's real, and then immediately thinking, I can still control this. Spoiler, I could not. Once that line was crossed, everything sped up in this gross, slippery way. Like when you miss a step on the stairs and suddenly you're halfway down before your brain catches up. Ryan and I didn't have some dramatic first time. No candles, no hotel montage. It happened on a Tuesday in his apartment because my husband texted that he'd be working late, and I already had the lie loaded. I told myself I was just going over to talk, which, technically, we did, briefly. Before we very much did not. I won't get into details because that's not the point. But I will say this, the aftermath was worse than the act. I sat in my car afterward and cried for reasons I still can't fully explain. Guilt, sure, but also annoyance, at myself, at him, at my husband for unknowingly trusting me enough to make this possible. Here's an unexpected twist I didn't see coming. I became meaner at home, not distant, mean, short replies, eye-rolling, picking fights over nothing. Apparently my coping mechanism is to turn into a jerk so I can justify my own behavior retroactively. My husband noticed. Of course he did. He asked if he'd done something wrong. I told him he was making everything about himself, which is a classic move when you don't want to answer a question. He apologized. That part still makes my stomach twist. The worst lie I told myself during this phase was that I was protecting him, that if he didn't know, he wouldn't be hurt, as if betrayal has an expiration date and not a blast radius. Meanwhile, Ryan started getting sloppy, texting too much, asking what I was going to do long term. I told him to relax. I told him I had it handled. I did not, in fact, have it handled, and that's when my husband found something. Not everything, just enough. He didn't find the text the way people expect. No dramatic phone grab, no password crack. It was worse, mundane and unavoidable. We share a laptop, or we did. He was trying to print something for work, and my iMessage popped up on the screen because I'd forgotten to log out. One message from Ryan, something painfully casual like, "Last night was intense. Miss you already." That's it. That's all it took. When I came home, my husband was sitting at the kitchen table with the laptop closed in front of him like it was evidence in a trial. He didn't yell. He didn't cry. He asked one question. How long? I could have come clean then. That was the fork in the road. Instead, I panicked and went full damage control mode. I told him Ryan was exaggerating. I said we'd kissed once, and it got emotionally messy. I blamed Ryan for pushing boundaries. I even had the nerve to say I hadn't told him because I didn't want to stress him out. I watched my husband's face shift as he tried to make sense of it, like someone rearranging furniture in a burning house. Unexpected event number 3. He believed me, or at least he wanted to. He said he needed time and went for a drive. I immediately texted Ryan to stop talking to me and to not contact me again. I framed it like I was choosing my marriage. Very noble, very fake. The problem with half confessions is that they rot. They don't sit still. And my husband, quiet, podcast listening, sighing husband, didn't drop it. He started paying attention, really paying attention. And once that happens, lies start tripping over themselves. That's when I realized this wasn't going to end with just one ugly conversation. The shift in my husband was subtle, but terrifying. He didn't yell or demand my phone like a bad movie. He got organized, calm, observant. He started remembering things, dates, times, little inconsistencies I'd been counting on him to ignore like he always had before. He asked questions days apart, never all at once, casual ones. "What restaurant was that lunch at again?" Or, "Didn't you say Ryan lived across town?" I answered confidently every time, which is a mistake when your story is built out of duct tape and vibes. I contradicted myself at least twice and pretended not to notice. Unexpected event number 4. He reached out to Ryan, not aggressively, just a man-to-man message asking him to confirm what happened so we can move forward. I didn't know this at the time. Ryan told me later, after the damage was done. Ryan panicked. Ryan has the emotional resilience of wet cardboard. Instead of sticking to the watered-down version I'd fed my husband, he dumped everything into a long, guilty paragraph. Not explicit, but clear. Timeline, frequency. He even apologized for disrespecting our marriage, which felt like salt in a wound I'd personally carved. My husband didn't confront me right away. That's the part that still messes with me. He slept on it. He went to work. He came home, made dinner, and asked if we could talk after. When he finally said, "I know you slept with him," I laughed. Actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because my brain short-circuited and chose the worst possible reaction. I immediately accused Ryan of lying to cover himself. I said he was obsessed with me. I said my husband was being manipulated. I lied until I couldn't anymore, and when I finally admitted it, really admitted it, my husband didn't explode. He just looked exhausted, like someone who'd been carrying something heavy and finally set it down. That's when I realized this wasn't about catching me anymore. It was about what he was going to do with the truth. The silence after my confession was worse than yelling would have been. He just sat there, elbows on the table, staring at a knot in the wood, like it had personally betrayed him too. I started talking to fill the space. Big mistake. I cried, real tears, not the cute kind, and told him I was lonely, that I felt invisible, that Ryan saw me in a way my husband hadn't in years. I threw in a line about how marriage changes people, as if that absolved me of basic decency. I even said, and I hate that I said this, that if my husband had been more present, none of this would have happened. He flinched at that, physically flinched. That should have stopped me. Instead, I doubled down because apparently my personality defect is defensive escalation. Unexpected event number 5. He asked me to stop, not angrily, gently. He said, "I'm not asking why you did it. I'm trying to understand who you are right now." That hit harder than anything else, because I didn't know who I was either, and I didn't like that being obvious. He told me he needed space and asked me to sleep in the guest room. Not a dramatic, "get out," just space. I agreed immediately, which I think hurt him more than if I'd argued. I packed a pillow and my phone and suddenly realized how stupidly attached I was to both. That night, I scrolled through old photos of us like a masochist. Trips, holidays, dumb selfies where we looked annoyingly happy. I told myself those moments were still real, that one bad month shouldn't erase years. I told myself a lot of things. Meanwhile, my husband was apparently Googling things like, "Can you come back from infidelity? And what does reconciliation actually require?" I know this because he told me later. At the time, all I knew was that he wasn't speaking to me, and that terrified me more than losing him outright, because silence leaves room for decisions. The next morning, he made coffee for one. That sounds small, but it felt like a gut punch. Our whole marriage ran on stupid routines: shared mugs, shared creamer, arguing about whose turn it was to buy filters. Watching him deliberately not include me felt more intentional than any fight we'd ever had. I tried to act normal. I said, "Good morning," like we were co-workers. He nodded, didn't look at me. I immediately told myself he was being dramatic, which is rich coming from the person who detonated the marriage in under a month. Unexpected event number 6. His mother showed up unannounced that afternoon. Apparently, he'd called her, not to tattle, according to him, but because he needed help thinking. I found this out when I walked into the living room, and she was sitting on the couch I'd cheated from emotionally for weeks. She hugged me, like everything was fine, then pulled back and looked at my face like she was trying to read subtitles. I lied to her, automatically. I said we were going through something, and that it was complicated. She nodded like she knew exactly what that meant. She definitely knew exactly what that meant. After she left, my husband asked why I'd lied. I snapped that it wasn't her business. He said calmly, "You made it her business when you made it my problem." That was annoyingly articulate of him. I started to feel cornered, so I did what I do best. I reframed myself as the victim. I said he was punishing me. I said he was enjoying my discomfort. I said maybe this whole thing proved we'd been broken longer than I realized. He didn't argue. He just said, "I'm meeting with a lawyer tomorrow." That was not in my mental timeline. I laughed again, because apparently that's my stress response, and said he was overreacting. He didn't correct me. He just went into the bedroom and closed the door. That night, I texted Ryan. I know. I told myself I needed closure. What I actually needed was reassurance that someone still wanted me. Ryan replied with, "I think your husband hates me." And instead of being angry, I felt relieved. The lawyer thing lodged itself in my chest like a splinter. I couldn't stop poking. All night I imagined him calmly planning his exit while I spiraled between rage and self-pity. By morning, I decided he was bluffing. He's cautious. He hates paperwork. This was just him trying to scare me into remorse. I was wrong. Again. He actually went. I know because he left a business card on the counter by accident, or on purpose, which is worse. I picked it up and immediately started Googling things like, what does separation really mean, and can one affair ruin everything, as if the internet was going to side with me. Unexpected event number 7. My boss called me into a meeting that same day. Turns out I'd missed a deadline I swore I'd handled. I snapped at her. I blamed personal issues. She suggested I take a few days off, not kindly, more like a liability management move. So suddenly I was home all day, unemployed adjacent, watching my husband move through the house like a guest who couldn't wait to leave. He packed a bag, not a dramatic one, just enough for a few days. He said he was staying with a friend to clear his head. I asked if that meant we were separating. He said he didn't know yet. I told him that felt unfair. He said, "So does being married to someone who lies to my face." That shut me up. After he left, I did something I'm not proud of, which narrows it down very little. I logged into his email. Yes, I know. Don't lecture me. I just needed to know what he was thinking. What I found wasn't revenge plans or love letters or anything satisfying. It was calendar invites, therapy consultation, follow-up with lawyer, lunch with his sister. No drama, just decisions. That's when it hit me that this wasn't about punishing me anymore. He was reorganizing his life like I was a variable he might remove. And for the first time since this started, I was actually scared. Being alone in the house was unbearable in a very specific, boring way. Not dramatic sobbing, just the hum of the fridge, the echo of my own footsteps, and the constant awareness that I had done this to myself. I decided the solution was action. I'm great at action when it's self-serving. I deep cleaned the house like that might reverse time. I cooked his favorite meal and realized halfway through that he wasn't coming home. I still finished it out of spite and ate it standing at the counter, which felt poetic in a sad sitcom way. Then came the apologies. Not the real kind. Those came later. These were strategic apologies. I drafted messages in my notes app like I was prepping for a hostage negotiation. I focused on how hard this had been for me, how confused I'd felt, how I never meant for things to go this far, as if distance was the problem, not intent. Unexpected event number 8. He didn't respond to any of them. Not even a thumbs up. Nothing. That silence flipped a switch in me. I went from remorseful to angry in about 3 minutes. I told myself he was milking this, that he wanted me to beg, that he liked having the moral high ground. I started rewriting the narrative in my head where he was cold, inflexible, emotionally unavailable. That's when his sister texted me. It wasn't confrontational. It was worse, kind. She said she loved me, but that her brother was not okay, that he'd barely slept, that he kept saying he felt stupid for trusting me. Stupid. That word sat heavy. I replied with a carefully curated message about how I was taking accountability and giving him space, which was mostly true if you ignore the part where I'd snooped through his email and drafted 12 unsent messages. That night, I dreamed he came home and acted normal. We joked. We ordered takeout. And in the dream, I felt relief, not guilt. When I woke up alone, I realized something uncomfortable. I didn't miss him the way I should have. I missed the version of my life where I wasn't the bad guy. And I had a feeling he was starting to realize the same thing, from the other side. He came back 3 days later, and I knew something was different the second he walked in. Not angry different, not heartbroken different, calm different, the kind that makes your stomach drop because you can't argue with it. He said he wanted to talk. I immediately started crying because I've learned that tears buy time. He waited. Didn't comfort me, didn't rush me, just stood there like he'd already stepped a few feet out of the room emotionally. I went first. I apologized again. This time I tried to sound sincere instead of strategic. I said I was ashamed. I said I'd cut off Ryan completely. I said it was the worst mistake of my life, which, depending on how this ends, might actually be true. I even offered therapy like it was a coupon. Unexpected event number 9. He thanked me, not forgave. Thanked. Then he told me how he'd been feeling, and this is where things got uncomfortable in a way I couldn't deflect. He said the moment he saw that message on the laptop, something collapsed inside him, that it wasn't just trust, it was his sense of reality. He said he replayed every memory of the last year wondering what else he'd missed. He said he felt embarrassed, like everyone else must have known before he did. I wanted to interrupt, to explain, to clarify, to defend myself. I didn't, because something in his tone told me this wasn't a debate. This was a eulogy. He admitted he'd been angry, furious actually. He said he'd imagined yelling, throwing things, even driving to Ryan's place and doing something stupid. But then the anger burned out and left this heavy sadness instead. He said that was when he realized something was broken in a way he didn't know how to fix. I latched onto that and said, "But broken things can be fixed." I said it quickly, too quickly. He nodded, and then he said, "Some things can. I just don't know if I can come back from not recognizing my own wife." That was the first time I felt the loss as something real, not theoretical. He wasn't deciding whether to punish me. He was deciding whether he still knew who I was. And I had no idea how to convince him that he did, especially since I wasn't sure myself. We existed in this weird limbo for the next week, not separated, not together, just parallel. We slept in different rooms, ate at different times, spoke in careful, logistical sentences, like roommates who'd once shared a life and now shared a lease. I tried to be on my best behavior. No sarcasm, no defensiveness. I stopped correcting him when he misremembered small things, which nearly killed me. I wanted to show him I could be different, as if personality swaps were available on Amazon Prime. Unexpected event number 10. Ryan showed up at my work. Yes, after I'd told him not to contact me, after everything. He looked wrecked, red-eyed, apologetic. He said he just needed to explain, and that my husband had misunderstood the tone of his message. I told him to leave before I called security. I meant it mostly. He asked if I loved my husband. I said yes without thinking. That surprised both of us. When I got home, I didn't tell my husband right away. Old habits die hard, but the lie sat in my throat like acid, and for once I didn't want to carry it. So I told him that night, everything, including the part where I hadn't wanted to at first. He listened, again, and then he said something I didn't expect. He thanked me for telling the truth now. He said it mattered that I chose honesty when I didn't have to. That tiny sliver of approval felt dangerously good. Like maybe this was turning around. Like maybe I could still fix it if I just behaved correctly long enough. Then he told me he'd made a decision. Not a final one, but a direction. He said he wanted a trial separation, time apart, therapy individually, not together. He said he needed to see who he was without constantly reacting to what I'd done. I told him that felt like dragging things out. I said it would be easier to either end it or recommit fully. I said uncertainty was cruel. He looked at me and said very calmly, "So is betrayal." And just like that, I was out of arguments. We set dates, logistics, who'd stay where, how bills would work. It felt absurdly adult for a situation born out of me acting like an idiot. As he packed again, I realized something uncomfortable and very on-brand for me. I wasn't afraid of being alone. I was afraid of him becoming someone who didn't need me anymore. The separation started quietly, which felt unfair. No slammed doors, no dramatic last look. He hugged me, brief, polite, devastating, and left with 2 suitcases and the good charger. I told people we were taking space. I said it with a tone that implied maturity and mutual respect. That was a lie. I told my friends he was overwhelmed and needed time to process. I told my coworkers we were doing great, actually. I even told myself this was temporary, a reset button, not the beginning of an ending. Unexpected event number 11. Being separated was easier than I expected. That realization made me feel like a monster. I slept better without worrying about his moods. I watched whatever I wanted. I didn't have to perform remorse on a schedule. I missed him, sure, but in the way you miss a routine, not a person. I hated myself for noticing that difference and immediately decided it was his fault for pulling away emotionally. We checked in once a week, like he suggested. Structured, timed, efficient. He talked about therapy insights, about realizing how much of himself he'd shrunk to keep the peace. I nodded and pretended that was news. I lied during those calls, soft lies, polite lies. I said therapy was helping me understand my patterns. I said I was focusing on growth. In reality, I spent a lot of time stalking his social media and imagining him happier without me, which made me furious at a man who had done absolutely nothing wrong in that regard. Then came the twist I didn't plan for. He stopped sounding sad, not happy, just lighter, more grounded. He laughed once during a call, genuinely, at something his therapist said. That laugh landed like a punch to the throat, because sadness I could work with. Relief? That felt like competition. So I did something reckless. Again. I suggested we try couples counseling after all. I framed it as compromise, healing, closure. What I actually wanted was to pull him back into orbit before he drifted too far. He didn't say no. He said, "Let me think about that." And for the first time since this started, I realized I might not be the one steering anymore. The waiting after, "Let me think about that," was excruciating. I checked my phone like a teenager with a crush, which was humiliating given that I was a grown woman who had blown up her marriage less than a month ago. When he finally agreed to couples counseling, I felt victorious. That should have been my first clue something was off. I framed it to myself as progress, proof that I hadn't completely destroyed everything. I even told a friend, very smugly, that he's open to working on things. That was not what he said, but details are flexible when you're narrating your own redemption arc. Unexpected event number 12. The counselor didn't like me, not openly. She was professional, calm, but she saw through my phrasing immediately. Every time I said we drifted or mistakes were made, she gently steered it back to choices, my choices. My husband barely spoke during the first session. When he did, it wasn't emotional. It was precise. Dates, actions, effects. Like he'd already processed the feelings and was just left with facts. Halfway through, the counselor asked him what he needed in order to consider reconciliation. I was ready. I leaned forward. I had answers prepared. He said, "I need to feel safe with someone who tells the truth even when it makes them look bad." The room went quiet. I nodded vigorously, like I hadn't spent the last month doing the exact opposite. Then she asked me the same question, what I needed to rebuild the marriage. And this is where everything went wrong. I said I needed him to stop punishing me and meet me halfway. I said I needed forgiveness if we were going to move forward. I said I couldn't live forever being defined by one mistake. One mistake. My husband looked at me then, really looked, and something in his face closed, like a door being locked gently but permanently. After the session, in the parking lot, he told me he needed time to think again. I snapped, quietly but sharply, that I was tired of waiting, that this limbo was unfair, that he was dragging this out. He said, "I'm not dragging it out. I'm making sure I don't ignore red flags again." That stung more than any insult could have. Later that night, he sent me a message, not emotional, not cruel. He said the counseling helped him realize something important about himself, about what he could and couldn't live with, and he said he wanted to talk one last time, in person, before making anything official. I told myself that meant there was still hope. I was very good at telling myself things. We met at the house, neutral ground, daytime, practical. That should have prepared me. He didn't sit down right away. He stood by the window, hands in his pockets, like someone waiting for a ride. I asked if this was the talk. He said yes. I immediately started bargaining in my head, which I guess is my brand. He told me he wasn't angry anymore. He said he'd reached something closer to acceptance, which sounded positive until he explained what he meant. Acceptance to him wasn't forgiving me and moving on. It was accepting that the version of me he thought he married didn't exist, or at least wasn't consistent enough to trust. He said the affair hurt, obviously, but the lying afterward was what did the real damage. The way I minimized, deflected, rewrote history in real time. He said every lie forced him to question his own instincts, and once that happened, he stopped feeling safe, not just with me, but with himself. I interrupted to say I'd been scared. He nodded and said, "I know, but you being scared didn't stop you from lying." That was it. No shouting, no cruelty, just clarity. He said he was filing for divorce the following week. I asked if there was anything I could do. He paused, and for a second I thought he might soften. Instead, he said, "I think the best thing you can do is be honest in your next relationship from the beginning, especially when it's uncomfortable." Then he told me what he'd learned, not as a lecture, more like an exit interview. He said love isn't about intensity or attention. It's about reliability, about knowing the person next to you won't reshape the truth to protect themselves. He said if someone feels tempted to lie to keep a relationship intact, it's probably already over. They just don't want to be the one to end it. Before he left, he gave me one piece of advice for Reddit, which somehow made this worse. He said, if your partner shows you who they are when things get hard, believe them. Don't wait for proof to pile up, and don't confuse silence with peace. Then he hugged me, brief, familiar, final, and walked out. So here I am, posting, telling my version, which I'm sure still sounds defensive because that muscle is overdeveloped. I lied a lot. I justified more. I lost someone who loved me steadily because I wanted to feel exciting. If you're reading this and you're in the early stages of something you're hiding, emotional, physical, whatever, don't ask yourself if you'll get caught. Ask yourself who you're becoming in the meantime, because that's the part that doesn't reset when everything else falls apart.